Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Behaviour, where I am Charlie, and with me is.
James, hello.
And we are going to bring you another three-part series, this time on differential reinforcement and the different versions of that kind of procedure that is used in behaviour analysis and behaviour support service work. First things first, James, how are you?
Yes, I'm doing okay, thank you. All good today, nice and busy. You?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing well. The basic breakdown is: do you know some of the words involved in that mangle that I just presented to you? What does the word reinforcement mean? Do you remember?
Yeah, so reinforcement is sort of the outcome of a activity or behaviour that will then cause that behaviour to occur more often.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So yeah, reinforcement is a consequence. It's a consequence that occurs after a behavior, which causes that behavior to increase again in future circumstances. So we've got then a second word there, which is a little bit more different than the ones that we've used so far. What do you think I mean by differential?
Differential, I mean, it's close to different, isn't it? So you can have various different types
Mm-hmm.
of reinforcement,
Mm-hmm.
I would guess.
Yeah, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. Basically, that would potentially be variety of reinforcement, right? The different types of reinforcement that you can get. Differential reinforcement refers to a process more than it refers to different things, okay? So if you are receiving reinforcement, it can kind of be considered, you can get more of it in a lot of different ways, right? You can get a higher value reinforcer, which is what you were discussing before, right? Or you could get the same reinforcement for a longer duration of time, right? Or you could get multiple deliveries of the same reinforcement, right? And all of those would be an increased magnitude, right, comparative to the lesser version,
Right,
right?
okay.
So differential reinforcement refers to the process of controlling how much reinforcement is allocated to a specific type of behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So there is a very specific law that we're following here, which is called matching law, right? And matching law basically means that the percentage allocation of reinforcement will determine the percentage allocation of behavior,
Okay, so
right?
how strongly a person reacts to the reinforcement.
Or which behavior they select, right?
Okay.
If a behavior leads to 100% of a reinforcement, you will use it 100% of the time,
Right,
right?
okay, yeah.
But if it is only successful 80% of the time and another behavior is successful 20% of the time, your behavior will allocate so that you use the 80% behavior 80% of the time
Hmm.
and you use the 20% of the behavior 20% of the time. Normally we talk about this in terms of ratio.
Do those percentages always add up though? What if certain behaviour, what if you've got multiple behaviours that are both
You can have more than two parts to a ratio.
yeah.
Yeah, right. So you could have a 20, a 20, a 20, a 20, and a 20, and they would always add up to 100. Or you could have 50 components to that ratio, right? And each of them being on an average of 2%.
Mm.
And they would always add up to 100, but it's the proportion and the distribution which it affects,
Okay.
right? So matching law basically is really good because it tells us that what happens with that extinction event that we talked about last time when you discontinue reinforcement from a behavior that was previously reinforced, while there is an initial increase of behavior, eventually it goes down,
Yeah.
right?
Until the little bump.
Until you get your spontaneous reoccurrence, right? What this basically means is as the percentage of reinforcement that was allocated to that old behavior is reduced to zero, you eventually stop doing that behavior because you don't get any reinforcement out of it, right? And that also means that if that's the only behavior that you have in that repertoire, as in it's the only thing that you do to get that outcome, right, you don't have an alternative to shift that ratio to,
Hmm.
right? So what does that mean? It means you keep doing it anyway, and you just get more and more dysregulated, right, when it happens. So what do? We teach an alternative behavior, potentially, right, and we reallocate the reinforcement so that it comes after the behavior that we want to see, right? And what that means is 0% of the reinforcement goes towards inappropriate behavior, 100% of reinforcement goes towards alternative behavior, and then you basically allocate your behavior appropriately. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'll give an example on this kind of one. If you were talking about someone who gets attention by grabbing other people as they walk past them, you don't want that to be reinforced, right? So what would you do? You would try and create a procedure which reduces the likelihood of them being able to grab and then get that followed by attention occurring, right? So this might be that people for a while are walking further than grabbing range or are very close and available am very aware when walking past this person, so that when they go to grab, they do not get grabbed and they do not react and by looking at the person, right? So then what you would have to do is you would have to teach an alternative behavior using some prompting system, maybe a vocal prompt to say, excuse me, as the person walks past. And if this leads to them looking at you, now none of the attention is allocated towards the inappropriate behavior of grabbing, and 100% of reinforcement is being allocated towards excuse me.
Yeah.
Matching law, right? You're going to say excuse me more next time, right? So differential reinforcement is when you have two behaviors that are receiving reinforcement and you differentiate how much proportionally each one gets so that someone is encouraged to get the best version of that behavior, right? And so you could have three versions of that behavior, right? You could have the grab, which is the inappropriate behavior. You could have a tap on the shoulder or a kind of like makes a noise which causes the person to look around that isn't excuse me, and then you have excuse me, which is your adult form that you really want the person to do, right? You could say you get a bit of attention when the person just makes a noise which gets the person's attention, right? Because it's not that inappropriate for that person's level. That might be semi-appropriate, right? But it's not as good as excuse me. So I'm going to get 20-30% of reinforcement allocated to that so that it's better as an option than grabbing. But then when I get the best version, I'm going to allocate 70% of reinforcement towards that.
Yeah.
Right? So that you are more likely to choose that one. And as you stop seeing the grab and you're only seeing the other two,
then you can switch it up and change it again.
Exactly. Move that 30% straight up into the adult form. Now you have 100% of the reinforcement allocated towards the good one. And the thing that's going through extinction is an okay behavior. So you're not going to get grabbing during the extinction process.
Yeah.
Right? And you have a system which will work.
Though, would you not still have an extinction of the grabbing behavior at that point, or would you have avoided that by still having those other options?
You will have basically been doing a full-blown extinction process on that first behavior while using your differential reinforcement on the two better versions.
Yeah.
Only when you've got that grabbing behavior to 0 and you're only seeing the noise and the excuse me, would you then go to trying to extinguish the second order behavior.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see that what that does is it makes it significantly more safe. It means you can control your procedures better and make sure that in the first phase you have procedures which stop you from getting grabbed, but you don't need those procedures in tier 2 because now they're just making noises.
Yeah. And would you, I presume the reason why you don't just skip directly to excuse me is because it's potentially easier for that person to go to the second stage before getting to the excuse me.
Or it might be that you were unable to prompt excuse me and the person made the noise which got the attention anyway.
Okay.
Or it might be that the person...
so it's just a nice stepping stone.
Yeah, or you're aware of the fact that if the person makes the noise, someone will probably look. So having that programmed into your procedure so that that is also an option, but it gets less reinforcement is probably a good idea, right?
Yeah.
And you need to think about it in terms of that. You need to think, how am I differentially reinforcing this, right? How am I making sure that the lowest potential percentage of reinforcement goes to the inappropriate stuff, that something goes to the thing in the middle, right? And that the thing they really want goes towards that behavior that you're trying to teach, right? So this is basically a description of the DRA procedure, and I'll kind of go into that a little bit in more detail and the difference between that and what is called a differential reinforcement of other behavior, right? And why you might choose to use either one of those in a later episode. But the basic idea around it is this is one of the most important concepts, especially when you're dealing with potentially an adult where you're not going to be able to not respond to something that they do, right?
Yeah.
If anything, make sure you respond as minimally as possible, but do not remove the response, especially if there is no alternative behavior there, because you might just put the behavior through extinction, get a huge increase in, intensity, and then you're going to have an increase in attention after that because you can't stop. Right. So I would say that in these situations, what you have to basically do is go, when the person is engaging in the behavior to get some attention, give them a little bit of attention just to kind of maintain them at that level and not let them escalate, but then prompt the appropriate behavior and then differentially reinforce so that that is the one which gets the most reinforcement and is the most encouraged to occur in the next opportunity. Yeah. Some issues with that might be the chaining of reinforcement, right? Of behaviors, rather. This basically means that you could end up having the escalation followed by the appropriate behavior rather than just getting the appropriate behavior in isolation. Yeah. So these all things have kind of like different ways of dealing with them, but we won't go too far into that one. Does this all kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I would guess that sort of in terms of putting that into place, it can only work in certain environments, because obviously
Hmm.
some behaviours might trigger in positions where you're not in full control. So, for
Hmm.
example, with that one where the grabbing of people,
Hmm.
if he or she was to grab at a person who is not necessarily
Hmm.
with your group,
Or a
for
member of the
example.
public, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in those situations, what you
Because obviously you
basically
can't control how they react.
well, yes, you cannot control how they react, but you can control how long the person is exposed to their reaction, right? I.e., minimizing their attention on the reaction so that they get less of the reaction as a reinforcer.
Hmm.
And there is also the process of basically maximizing the reinforcement for the behavior that you're trying to see, right? You got some reaction out of that one, you're probably going to need an even bigger reaction for the thing that you're actually trying to
Yeah,
teach.
so
So
you're
it's
just
still
going to have to proportionally increase your own response to the one that you want.
yeah, and you do have to keep in mind that if you're putting a reaction that intense after something, it's going to have to be faded out very, very quickly, because you do not want somebody to have that level of like reaction to get a behavior reinforced. And if you normalize that as that's success, right? That's a real problem. Now you're going to have to do that all the time,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of those ones where there's a lot of circumstances where the specifics of a case will necessitate that you change how you're doing things and kind of go to a second order procedure potentially than the one that you were originally intending to, or adjust the procedure so it works better for the person, right?
Yeah.
But it's all about you going, okay, this is the reality I'm dealing with, and I should look at it in as factual as manner as possible, right? As much as it is nice to kind of put inference in a positive manner and say that went X, that went well, that went, really what you should look at is go, that was good, but, right? Here are the things which did not work. Here
Yeah.
are the ways that we need to change them if we want that thing to be successful. And here's the systematic way that we're going to bring this closer to the outcome that we're attempting to get to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of one big kind of like section of this DR procedure, right? And the differential reinforcement procedure has kind of been divided into lots of different sub procedures, right? Which have different things that they are attempting to reinforce, right? And they involve different forms of data taking, and they have different kind of like criteria for success, which means that when the person receives reinforcement is the thing which we're controlling, right? That means that controlling when the person receives reinforcement is what is effectively controlling the person's behavior, as much as the things which are prompting that behavior to occur in the first place.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any final questions on that one, or are
No,
we all
I don't think so.
amazing? Well, I hope that was informative, everybody. Please let me know if it was clear, and yeah, we'll come back to this later. Bye.